Father, we love you, and let us take time tonight to focus on you, and let us not leave here unchanged, that we would not simply gain knowledge, but we would actually learn to love you and love each other more, even those who we don't feel deserve it. That we would grow in our knowledge of you, and just let us learn to love you better. Let us be a part of the solution this world needs, and may your will be done and your kingdom come. It's in your name that we pray.
Amen.
Definitely ouch. The death of his brother.
Short chapter today.
Chapter last week was like 38 verses. Our chapter this week, 12 verses. So we got it in the bag, guys. We're gonna be looking today. And so, since our chapter is shorter, we have decided that we're going to focus a little bit more on context before we go into the chapter. We'll do context of like the whole Bible, the beginning, right? But we definitely want to focus in a lot on like 1st and 2nd Samuel, what we've read so far, because there's important decisions that are starting to happen at the beginning of 2nd Samuel, specifically having to do with David and his kingship and stuff. And so I think that it's important that you look at stuff that has already happened in the progression of stuff that has happened over the storyline between 1st and 2nd Samuel, so we can kind of compare what's going on, we can see God's promises and how it's going through the whole story. So,
At this point, it's been almost 6 months or maybe even longer since we started Samuel.
a long time.
Been a while, so I mean, heck, that's pretty much the entire thing that happens in this chapter. So
Yeah.
we'll definitely take some time to recap the whole story of Samuel. We'll start with the beginning of the Bible because, as David would always say, this is not Genesis 1, chapter 1, and it's also not the first book. So we have context to cover. But more specifically, like she said, we're going to go over the overarching story of Samuel, or King David. And so kind of just get someone to recap the first 5 books of the Bible pretty generally. Just the Torah. Doesn't have to be detailed, just enough to get us going.
So start in Genesis. And
Yeah.
so in the beginning, God created the earth. He used 7 days and had the last day for rest, which is Sunday. It was declared a holy day. And then shortly thereafter, he created Adam and Eve and all the living things on earth in 7 days. And then shortly after, there was the first sin, the fruit on the tree. And then this introduced sin into the world. And then the separation of God from mankind. And then I believe, if I remember correctly, he banished them into the desert to eat dust. And then he also put a curse on them that one of their sons would kill the other.
He didn't curse them.
He didn't curse
He actually never curses man. He curses the serpent and he curses the ground.
Okay. No, I'm drawing. I'm Cain and Abel, that's where I was going to go.
Very good.
next.
So we're going pretty general here. So we're going for like the main
Don't
thrust of the
need to
Bible.
go into that much detail.
Yeah. So we got creation, you got exile, and then God has a plan to take care of the sin problem. And so moving on from there, you get past, the growth, like, man growing more sinful, and then Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
God splits everyone into nations, and then he starts with a man named Abraham, right?
Yes.
So pick up with Abraham.
Abraham and his many sons. He gives one son a blessing, and then this is where Islam and Christianity split off. If I remember correctly, Islam's believe that he gave the blessing to Ishmael.
Right. Because he was the firstborn.
Yes. And branches off. I'm drawing a blank on the rest. I'm sorry. I'm a little rusty on my Bible.
You're good.
Jacob, the deceiver.
Right, so yeah, Abraham, he tells Abraham, hey, I'm going to call you to this land. I'm going to do something special with you. I'm going to bless you, and you're going to be a great nation, right? So Abraham comes to, the land of Canaan, and he doesn't know how God's going to accomplish this because he's old and his wife's barren, right? And And so throughout the next several chapters of Genesis, we're kind of seeing Abraham figuring out how this is going to happen, because you can see he doesn't exactly know how it's going to turn out, right? He thought it might be like his servant. What was his name? Eliezer, right? Thought maybe it would be him, and then he said no, it's going to be through your loins. So he thought maybe they would sleep with the slave woman, and that would be the son. But that was Ishmael, but it was not him. God said it's going to be through your wife, and so all that happens. We get Isaac, right? And then Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob's name's changed to Israel, and then we have his 12 sons that become the 12 tribes. They go to Egypt during the time of famine. They grow, and the Egyptians enslave them. And then how does God deliver them from slavery?
Through Moses.
Through Moses, yep. And so what happens after they get delivered?
Moses, the burning bush, they go parting with the Red Sea, desert for, don't remember how many years. I want to say 40.
Yeah.
And then God delivers him to kills them off Moses, delivers him to the promised land. Jacob is now the leader.
Or Joshua.
Joshua, my bad. And then they go through various cycles of going away from God and going back towards God after he delivers them into the hands of Philistines and various other.
Right. And that's the period of the judges, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Judges.
I say that because Samuel picks up at the end of the time period of the judges. And so, yeah, you're right. So we get to the promised land, they start conquering it. Joshua, as he's about to die, he says, hey guys, so you're either all in or you're all out. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But he's basically telling them to, make their stand. And so they say that they will serve the Lord, and as Morgan Freeman says, they did not.
They don't.
And so they very quickly start slowly not taking God's word seriously and disobeying. So that's when we get the whole judge cycle where they fall into sin, they get subjugated, and then they cry out to God. God delivers them, and so we get through. That's the whole the whole story of Judges. And so Judges ends. We pick up 1 Samuel, and we get a guy named Samuel, and he is the last judge. Can someone pick up 1 Samuel for me?
Also, before we go into 1 Samuel, what's like the one line in Judges that is the takeaway? It's the very last verse of Judges.
In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everybody did was right in their own eyes.
Yes, very good. There's no king in Israel. What's the problem with that?
Nobody to rule over them.
Who was supposed to rule over them?
God.
God was supposed to be the ruler, but they
wanted
kind of
to-
said,
yeah.
nah, we kind of want to do it our way. We want some of the benefits of God, but we don't want to fully follow him. We want a worldly king, right? So there's no king in Israel. That's an issue because God should be their king. And they did what's right in their own eyes. Also not good because they should be doing what's right in God's eyes, right? Okay, now go ahead, 1 Samuel.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but did God appoint Herod? Oh, I'm mixing something up. No, he appointed a king, and then he ended up failing.
Yes.
Yeah, but
And
we're-
then
We're
he
not
ended up.
quite there yet, but
Yeah.
yes, he did. He did
Okay.
appoint someone. So we have.
God answers the prayer of Hannah for her son, and God gives him, God gives her Samuel, and Samuel is the last judge of, the period of the judges, but before Saul becomes king.
Yes. What's so important about Samuel? What did he do for Israel that was really important?
Led a revival.
Yep. He led a revival to where there was kind of this like breath of hope, right? There's this, we come from the Judges where all the people of Israel are doing what's right in their own eyes, right? And they're doing all this crazy stuff, not following God. It's very corrupt. And then we get to this moment that Samuel comes and he's kind of delivering them from this. He leads this huge revival where he's going around to all the people, and people are kind of turning back to God. They're repenting, they're following him, things are good for a while. And then it happens. They follow Samuel, but then what do they say?
We want a king like the nations.
We want a king like the nations. So, what happens?
They get exactly that.
They get exactly that. Get exactly that. And what does Samuel tell the people whenever they say, hey Samuel, we want a king like the nations, and Samuel's really hurt by this, and he goes to God and he's like, I've been leading this huge revival and I've been helping these people, and God's like, don't worry Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. He said, give them what they want. If they want a king like the nations, we'll give it to them. And so he does. But what does Samuel say before he gives the king to them? What does he tell them that he'll do? The king will do.
The king will take from them.
Take your wives, they'll take your children, they'll take your things, they'll take. Good. And then what happens? What does Samuel do after that?
Then is Saul appointed?
Yeah, Saul is appointed. How do we describe Saul?
Dark, handsome, like the people view king as.
Yeah.
Tall, handsome, but he doesn't really have that good of a heart.
He also hid at the very beginning, which is hilarious. And he had other qualities that were not as good.
Yeah,
Right.
tell us more about
Yes.
that, George. He hid at the beginning?
Just that he hid.
Yeah. Yeah, so Samuel goes and he's going to appoint this guy named Saul, like Joseph said. And like Maverick said, he's tall, dark, and handsome. He's what everybody wants. He's a worldly king, right? And from the outside, it would seem like this dude would be a great king. Like, if you want anyone to rule the nations, you should pick Saul. But we see from the very beginning, like what George was saying, Saul is not coming out looking too great. They're like looking around to appoint who the king is, and they're like, where is Saul? And he's like hiding over in the baggage, like hiding away from all the people. So you're like, oh man, this is going to be our king? Are you sure about that? Is that okay? So that's how we're introduced to Saul. And we've talked about before, the first things that we see someone doing or something that they're saying says a lot about their character, right? The author is trying to tell us, hey, this is how I want this person to be portrayed by the way that their actions and their words show them from the very first time we meet them. So he's hiding in the baggage and he's kind of acting clueless and scared. And so we're like, ooh, this person's going to be the king of Israel, God's people? That's not too good. Okay, so then what happens after that?
Isn't that when Samuel tells Saul to go and do a burnt offering, but instead of waiting, he does it with, he does it before Samuel actually comes?
Not quite.
Or am I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe he messes up something else about the burnt offering.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does like two really big bad things. But before that, I believe we're talking about with the Amalek or Ammonites. Whereas, so we get a city called Jabesh Gilead, which comes into play later on. But they are being besieged by the Ammonites, and they go to Saul for help. And what does Saul do? What is Saul doing in Gibeah when they come send people for help? Do y'all remember? He's already been anointed king.
Someone said something.
He was farming or something.
Yeah. Just do what he said.
However, when it said that whenever he did learn what was going on, do y'all remember what he did to get his army raised to fight the Ammonites?
Took everyone's firstborn.
Well, like more specifically, it's actually somewhat calling back to a story in Judges, though a little bit less gruesome.
Doesn't he take two I think he does something with 2 oxen.
He takes an ox and cuts it to pieces and it sends it out throughout the land and says, like, this is what I'm gonna do to your oxen if you don't come fight.
Oh.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. And so we see that it's kind of the first glimpse of the kind of character Saul is. Like, he can raise an army, but the whole point of the king is to lead people to God, to lead people to obey his law, because we see that, before this, the people, their king was God, and their law was the law that, they got on Mount Sinai. And so the whole thing was that they followed the law, things would go well. If they didn't, things would not go so well. So if there's going to be this whole king in place, his job is to lead people to obey the law and to, lead them spiritually and do things God's way, which is what we've been talking about in 2 Samuel especially. But we see Samuel's kind of doing things by his own means, his own way. And so, that's already kind of a big red flag. And so, but Saul does defeat the Ammonites, so he still gets the job done. But not the way that he should have. And so, what about after that? That's chapter.
13? Or 14? With John?
Is this where we get to the offerings?
Yeah,
Or are we still a little ways from there?
a little, like a very short ways from there.
Is this his first big mess up?
Yeah, because Saul.
Okay, yeah. So
Is it
shortly after that's when Samuel has his final address to Israel,
Mhm.
and that's like him pretty much like his last little speech before he completely hands off the torch to Saul. And do y'all remember how that went? Like Samuel's final address to Israel. It was somewhat convicting.
Was it? Hang on, let me.
Because how was Samuel's job as a ruler? How well did he do leading the people? Good, right?
Pretty good, yeah.
But yet the people, still weren't satisfied, and so if you remember, Saul basically tells them like, okay, so God is witness before us. Whom have I defrauded or whom have I wronged? And the people say like, you didn't do anything wrong. What's up?
I was reading 2 Samuel, verse 3, and I heard it's saying there was a war between the house of Saul and the house of David.
Yes, in 2 Samuel.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. We're in chapter 12 of 1 Samuel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's kind of one last reminder of hey guys, God was supposed to be your king, but y'all rejected him, but there is still hope. You just have to keep, being obedient and follow the law, and things will go well. So it's somewhat of a convicting but also reassuring message before he's kind of in the back scene.
The last verse says, but if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we'll see for the rest of the story up until now, oftentimes the spiritual state of the king will often reflect the spiritual state of the rest of the nation as well. We even saw that last chapter as well, because he's the leader and he sets the example.
And something that David has said throughout the story for Samuel is that with great power comes great responsibility. So, if the king is not doing what he's supposed to be doing, then he's failing.
Right. Like we said, the main responsibility of the king, now that they have one when they shouldn't have it in the first place, is to lead people to God and to help them follow the law, God's law.
Amen.
Do you remember what happens after that? Chapter 13. We get a new, not so new enemy introduced.
Philistines.
The Philistines?
Same time.
Philistines.
Something.
Mhm.
Isn't it
Happens to
not,
be that it's
Dave's a man after God's own heart?
And
Maybe
Yeah,
not.
for Samuel?
Not quite.
Yeah, we're not quite
And
there.
doesn't-
That is true.
Saul sent Jonathan to defeat him.
Yeah.
And then we get to his unlawful sacrifice.
Yeah, the sacrifice comes after that. So we see Saul and Jonathan, they're fighting Philistines, but they're not together. Saul and Jonathan are separate right now, so they have two separate armies going on. And let's just think about overarching thing, what we need to take from this. We know that Jonathan, does he come out on top in this manner, or does he get defeated by the Philistines? Does Jonathan attack the Philistines and win, or does he not?
Jonathan defeats the Philistines.
He does. And then Saul does what? What does Saul do? Jonathan defeats him, and Saul says, hey, he takes credit, right? He takes credit for the Philistines, Jonathan defeating the Philistines, right? Because Saul is all about outward image, right? We learn about that a lot. He's really cool with like making himself look like he's this really great king, but in the meantime, he just kind of wants to like sit back and chill in his palace. He doesn't actually want to get out there and necessarily fight for his kingdom and for his people, right? And so we see that here. Jonathan is, what's his relation to Saul?
He's Saul's son.
Yeah, he's Saul's son, right? And Jonathan goes and he defeats the Philistines. And he does a really good job doing it, right? And Saul's like, hey, let me take credit for that because I want to look like a really good king, so I'm going to say that I like defeated all of these Philistines, right? And then we get to the sacrifice that Joseph was talking about, right? So we have this thing where Samuel says that he will come and give a sacrifice. Why is it important that Samuel needs to be there for a sacrifice? What is Samuel's role? Yep, he's a priest, right? And if we go back and we look in Levitical laws, right, the people that give sacrifices are the priests, right? So it's really important for Samuel to be there, and that's good to know whenever we go to the story because we see why what Saul did is wrong. That's because a priest needs to be there for a sacrifice. And while Samuel is gone, Saul decides to take it into his own hands, and he's like, hey, Samuel said he was going to be here, but he's not here, so I'm going to take it into my own hands as king, and I'm going to give the sacrifice. Ooh, not so good. Samuel's supposed to be there. Well, then Samuel walks up in the middle of Saul giving a sacrifice, and he's like, dude, what are you doing? I told you I was coming. And Saul tries to make all these excuses and dodge around what Samuel is trying to tell him, that, hey, you're not supposed to be doing this. And he was like, but I was trying to be godly, and I was trying to give a sacrifice so that I can look good. And Samuel's like, it doesn't matter what you were trying to do. You still did it, and you weren't supposed to, right? Because, again, Saul's just worried about looking really good in front of the people, right? There's something that goes wrong. Oh, let me give a sacrifice on behalf of my people to God. He's not actually worried about doing something that's pleasing to God. He's trying to look good so that the people will rally behind him and they won't leave his army. And Samuel knows that that was not Saul's motivation. Whenever he gave that sacrifice, he wasn't trying to be a godly king. He was simply trying to look good from the outside. And so he wasn't supposed to do it in the first place, but his motivation, his heart was wrong, right? And so Samuel was mad about that. Then we get to chapter 16, and a very important person is introduced, which is...
David.
David, yes. So we have this moment when God comes to Samuel, and he's like, hey, Samuel, how long are you going to be lamenting over Saul? Because it's been revealed to him that Saul is, the kingship is not going to stay with him, right? We have that scene when, I think it was for the sacrifice, when he ripped the rope, right?
Yeah, that was the previous chapter with the Amalekites.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So he saved the king and he saved the good stuff and said, I was going to offer it to God.
Mm-hmm.
And Samuel said, he said the kingdom is, or God's rejected you. And I think as he turned away, that's when Saul reached for his robe.
Yeah.
And this robe tore, and he said, in the same way, God has torn the kingdom from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the kingship's no longer going to be with Saul. And so now we're wondering, okay, well, how's the kingship going to continue? And so that's whenever we meet David, and God comes to Samuel, and he's like, hey, how long are you going to lament over Saul? Like, there's a new person that I'm going to give. You need to go to Jesse in Bethlehem, and there's going to be someone there that you're going to anoint, and he's going to be the new king of Israel, right? And so we meet David, and what is David's occupation? What is he?
He's a young shepherd musician.
Yeah, he's a young shepherd, yeah. He's just
yeah.
out in the shepherd's fields, doing his thing with his flock of sheep, right?
Playing his harp.
And it's also funny, in their culture that that's like a lowly position, but also it's incredibly important at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was very responsible. Like at that time, if there was a bear, an animal was going to kill whatever kills the animals, he would protect them. So he's also like a little bit of foreshadowing about how like protective and like brave. He's protecting the animals.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually has an important role.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said he fought off lions and bears.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. With his bare hands.
Sure.
Yeah. And there's an important like imagery I think that happens with the whole shepherd thing, because Jesus comes and he's the shepherd of us, and so I think there is like some parallels that happen there. So we meet David. Samuel goes, he anoints David. What do we know David as? What's that little one-liner we we always say he's what?
A man after God's own heart.
He's a man after God's own heart. Good. And after he gets anointed, he ends up being in Saul's courts, right? So he ends up playing music for Saul because Saul needs someone whenever he gets, like really angry and stuff like that, someone to calm him down. And so David plays the music for him.
Didn't God put an evil spirit on Saul?
Yeah.
Yes. And so we see David there. Then we get to chapter 17, and we see David versus Goliath. Okay, this is a really important turning point, right? Because this is whenever we see David speak and what he says. What's the first thing that we hear David say?
Who does it say this uncircumcised Philistine think he is?
Yeah. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine who thinks he can defy the living armies of God or something like that, right? So we see immediately where David stands, right? He is not standing over on Saul's side who wants to look really cool, like an outwards appearance. He is a man after God's own heart who is aligning with God's will and what his standards are, right? So we immediately see what that is. And he goes in and he defeats the Philistine, right?
Very quickly.
Yeah. And then we see the contrast between David and Saul, which is what? What do the people think of David versus what do they think of Saul?
They love David and say something about Saul that's good, but they talk about David even better. Saul has slain his thousands, but David has tens of thousands.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so they love David. David's building up this following of all these people, right? Because Saul, chilling out in his castle and in his, not castle what we think of, his palace, okay? his headquarters, he's chilling out. And David is the man that's actually out there fighting for the people. He's the one that's standing in the gates and the people are seeing him going in and out and in and out, right? So that's whenever what Ben said, Saul's killed his thousands, but David has tens of thousands, right? What does Saul think about this?
Super jealous.
Yeah, super jealous. Saul is not about this because he cares about his appearance, right? And he's like, these people are following David, but I'm the king. And so he's not jiving with that. He's like, no, this is not good. I don't like this. And so we see that Saul goes on this manhunt after David, right? He's like out to kill him. He's like, this guy's after my kingship. I'm not having it. You're going to die, right? But we know that David is God's anointed, right? And so we know that David kind of has this shield of protection that's over him because until he is sitting on the throne, David has this assurance that he's not going to die, right? Because God fulfills his promises. God is a faithful God. And so he knows that he's secure. He's going to go through some stuff, but he's secure in God's arms, right? Because he knows that God has made this promise that he will be king of Israel. And until that's fulfilled, he can't die, right? So Saul goes on this manhunt after him, and he's chasing him around through the desert and all this type of stuff. And David gets multiple times where he gets to almost kill Saul. But how does David respond to that? Those times. There was one time when he was in a camp, and him and one of the men went down to Saul. And there's another time, was it they were in Gedi in a cave?
It was in a cave. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, he was in a cave and he cut off his robe.
Yes. Yeah. So those were two times that he had a chance to kill him. And what does his men tell David whenever Saul was there? Yeah.
It's your chance to
Why
do
aren't
it.
you going to do it when you have the chance?
Yeah, exactly. Why wouldn't you want to do it whenever you have the chance? God has delivered Saul into your hands, David. Why would you not go ahead and kill him? But what does David say to that?
Saul's his anointed one.
Saul is the anointed one. David has this thing where he will not touch Saul. David has this thing where he will not touch Saul because he is God's anointed. Even though he knows that David's anointed and he's going to be the king one day, he won't touch Saul. He's not going to kill Saul. Right? And so we see these multiple times. They have these encounters. Saul's chasing after him, sending these men. He almost has a lot of close calls, and he won't touch Saul. He won't kill him. And then they kind of separate for a while. David steers Saul multiple times. What's something else important that's good for this
David and
storyline?
Jonathan's friendship.
Yeah, David and Jonathan's friendship. Describe that a little bit. That's good to know. Because that plays into some stuff we're talking about today.
Wasn't Jonathan essentially, in a sense, spying on Saul and keeping David up to date on Saul's whereabouts and what Saul was doing and Saul's current threats to him?
Yeah, there was times when he was kind of playing a double agent a little bit, yeah. And we see that the relationship between David and Jonathan is really, really strong. Even though we said Jonathan is Saul's son, David and Jonathan have this really close bond with one another because they kind of seem to both align under the same idea that God's number one and we serve God first. Jonathan's very different from Saul in the fact that we said Saul just cares about his outward appearance. He's not too concerned about serving God. He just kind of wants to do things that are beneficial to him. While David is completely opposite, and we see that Jonathan and David really align in that way, and that's what makes them so close to one another. And so we see that relationship develop, but eventually they have to part ways because that's when David goes off and hides because Jonathan's like, hey, Saul's out to get you, and so he leaves. Then we see David makes an alliance with the Philistines for a while. That's something important to note, which is just crazy because we talked about Philistines are bad guys. But David goes in alliance with the Philistines for a while. He plays a double agent a little bit too. What's something else important? We can talk about the very end of the chapter because this is what's gonna lead us into 2 Samuel. What happens to Saul and his sons?
The chapter.
They
31.
31.
They die.
They die. Oh no! How do they die? Paint the picture? The scene. What's the scene?
Saul died by his own hands. He stabbed himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before the Philistines can get him. And Jonathan died in the fight. And there was someone that came up to the bodies, right? And chop off their heads and put them on a mountainside or a cliff of a mountain so everyone can see Saul and David's heads and something like that.
Yeah. So Saul and his sons, they die in the battle, and they put them on the top of Mount Gilboa, right? So that way, do what?
Wasn't it Beth Shan? A mountain on a mountain in Beth Shan. The reason why I say this is because when David and I were in Israel, we actually ran up that mountain. So
Correct.
It might have been best
yeah,
friend.
Yeah.
we were there. So I just wanted to add that.
That might have been the name. The name escapes me.
That's
Probably
yeah.
so.
So was this the part where the death was cowardly and he was sad? He didn't like that he was killed that way.
Saul? Are you talking about Saul?
Yeah, Saul was no longer king,
Beth
right?
Shan.
Yeah. Saul didn't want to be killed by the Philistines because he thought that was just a bad way to go. He was like, I don't want to be killed by the hand of the Philistines.
But wasn't it David who was feeling a little bit despair over the whole situation? He didn't like it either.
At the beginning of 2 Samuel. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So we end 1 Samuel, the death of Saul, the death of his sons, and what's crazy about that, what we need to take away from that is the king at the moment is dead. His sons are dead, right? In a kingship, if the father dies, who takes his place? The son. The sons are dead. Yeah. So now we move into 2 Samuel, and we remember that promise that God gave David that he is the anointed one, and he will sit on the throne one day. So we're seeing that we're inching closer and closer and closer to God's promise being fulfilled, right? Because David is getting closer to being on the throne because Saul's dead and his sons are dead. Then we get to 2 Samuel.
Yeah. So we start off with 2 Samuel that's whenever David learns of Saul's death. So we get a guy who comes up to David and tells him he has Saul's crown and says that he himself came across Saul and finished him off and delivered the crown to him. And do you remember what kind of tone he had when he delivered this news?
Like he was very, very very happy, very excited. And then David was kind of second questioning him, how do you know all this?
Yeah, we'll see it referenced in this chapter as well. But he definitely delivered it as if it was good news because he says Saul, your enemy, he's dead. And how does David respond to this?
He's not happy.
Right. Yeah.
Orders his execution.
Yep.
Yeah, because what did we say before about how David viewed Saul?
God's anointed.
God's anointed. He wasn't really his enemy. He didn't really view him that way. And so what does he have happen? What does he do with the guy?
He executes him. He gets someone to
Has him executed, yeah.
execute him. Yeah.
And so he mourns over Saul and his sons, and he actually exalts them and sings this whole song. And just throughout this entire book, 2 Samuel especially, we really see David kind of establishing his kingdom and the way things are going to be run. And like that's one big step in that direction. You know, we just talked about how Saul ran his kingdom his way, not God's way, and we see that David is the exact opposite. He runs his kingdom God's way. He doesn't put himself on the throne. You know, that's why he refused to touch Saul. And so we see in chapter 2 that David is actually finally made king. Like, the promise that God made to him is finally partially being fulfilled. However, it's not over all of Israel yet. It's just over Judah. And so he still has to be king over, he has yet to be king over all of Israel. So we have David being anointed king of Judah, but who gets anointed king over all of Israel? The rest of the tribes. Do y'all remember?
Starts with an I.
Ish-bosheth?
And
Oh.
who made him king? Who anointed him king?
Oh,
Alright.
Does it start with an A?
Starts with an A.
Yeah, guy from last
Commander
chapter.
of.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so we have this sort of civil war going on because we have two kings, one nation. Doesn't really work that way. Yeah. And so there's a little story where David actually goes to Jabesh-Gilead after he's anointed king, and he actually blesses them because they're the ones who actually buried Saul. They gave him proper burial. They came in the night, took the bodies off of the wall, and actually buried them properly. And they showed respect to the king. And David is really big about showing respect to God's anointed. And then Ish-bosheth's made king, civil war. And then another big thing in chapter 2 is we get a little encounter. We get the first kind of battle of the civil war, and we have Abner on Ish-bosheth's side. Who's the guy on David's side? His commander? Joab. And so we have this whole story where they meet at this body of water, pond, whatever. And do y'all remember how that went?
They all died pretty much, right?
Yeah. So
They didn't really. It was kind of like a stare down competition, like because they were both enemies, so they decided to go up to one another, but it was like a lot more violent than what it anticipated to be.
yeah, they said let them contest. Let them have a contest.
Let them compete.
Yeah, let them
Yeah.
compete. Yeah, hold a contest before us. And it says that they like took each other and thrust their swords in each other, and then battle ensues. And do you remember what big thing happened in that battle? There was really one main thing, plot wise, that happens.
Brother,
So
Joab, right?
Joab is the commander, and then
His brother dies by Abner.
yeah, because
Yeah,
he
it's
wouldn't
like the
just
final-
go pursue somebody else. So there's Zeruiah, right, and that's David's sister, right, and she has 3 sons, which are Joab,
Abner.
not Abner,
Okay.
3 sons of Zeruiah.
I don't know how to say it.
So you got Joab and then his 2 brothers.
They start with A's, right?
Oh. Joab, Abishai, and Asahel.
Yeah, and so which one gets killed by Abner? Also, hell yeah. And so that happens. They keep on fighting, and then we see that Abner's losing, and so he tells Joab, how long will the sword devour, and pleads with him to stop fighting. Joab calls off the fight. They return to their places, and
We see who comes out on top.
yeah. Do you remember the casualties on each side?
360 versus like 19. What's the
Yeah.
other?
Yes.
18 times more or 18 times less, however you look at it. Is that yeah, and so then in chapter 3 we get kind of 2 things. We have the house of David's strength being strengthened, and we have the house of Saul being weakened. And so basically David has a bunch of sons by all these different women, which is kind of a mixed bag. His house is growing, but he also shouldn't be doing that way. And then we have this whole encounter with Ish-bosheth and Abner. And Abner is trying to grow himself in Saul's house, and he starts sitting with one of Saul's concubines. Ish-bosheth calls him out, and then Abner, what does he do in response? Do you remember? It's kind of a plot twist. Abner, he basically just gets called out and gets angry for being called out on what he's doing.
He decides to align with what side?
David.
Yeah, he defects basically, and the whole time you're kind of wondering whether he's being legit or not. And he goes to David and says, let me help you. And David agrees on one condition. Do you remember what that condition was?
Gets his wife back.
Mm-hmm.
What was kind of the issue with that?
She's already married again. She was given away a second time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate consequence of political mess. Yeah, it was. But it was something that David felt needed to be done to make sure that Abner was being legit, because that's not something Abner would do if he was actually out for himself. And so he grabs Michal, and then Abner basically goes to Israel and speaks on David's behalf, tries to get all the elders of Israel to side with David. And he goes back to David. David holds a feast, and Abner basically asks him for permission again to go out and speak on his behalf. And David lets him go in peace. And then, lo and behold, the moment that he walks out, who comes? Yeah, he returns from a raid, and
Split second window.
little Joab figures out that Abner was just there, and David sent him out, but actually sent him out in peace. And so, how does Joab respond to this?
You had him. Why'd you let him go?
Yeah.
Once again, just like we just talked about with Saul, he was right there. You could have just killed him. Why would David not do this? Or I guess I should say, yeah. How does David respond to Joab?
What does Joab do? Joab comes and he's like, David, why would you let him go? And David's like, he just lets him go. And so then what does Joab do? What does he decide? He thinks is the smartest decision.
He goes after him himself, right?
Yeah, he goes after himself. Is that what you're gonna say, Maverick? Okay.
Takes matters into his own hands.
Yeah.
And so Joab, without telling David, goes behind his back and gets Joab to come back to Hebron, meets him in private, and kills him, not unlike the manner that Asahel was killed as well. What is David's response to Joab doing this?
I and my kingdom are innocent before the Lord.
Yeah. Once again, a big thing we're seeing going on here is David runs his kingdom differently. To basically anybody else, it would seem kind of like silly to respond that way. You would think that this would be a good thing, because David knows at the end of the day that two people are going to have to die for him to be king over Israel, Abner and Ish-bosheth. I think he pretty much acknowledges that, but he's not one to take that into his own hands. He knows that God's going to take care of it because, as we've been talking about, God made a promise. And so he's not stupid. He knows they're going to have to be taken out of the picture, but he puts that in God's hands, not his own. Mm-hmm. And so how does he views this whole thing as being just injustice, not fair. He commands his men to actually mourn Abner, and they mourn, and he even sings this little song at the end. He says, basically, you were killed unjustly. May the evildoer be repaid according to his evil. And we see that the people are listening to him. David is David's doing his job essentially. He is actually leading the people, and he is getting them to actually understand the character of God. And that pretty much brings us to this chapter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Without further ado, chapter 4.
All right.
Sean and his Bible reading voice is now
Well-
going to take charge.
We'll see.
I'll drink directly first. That works.
When Ish-bosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed, and all Israel was dismayed. Now Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baana, and the name of the other Rechab, sons of Rimmon, a man from Benjamin, from Beeroth. For Beeroth also is counted part of Benjamin. The Beerothites fled to Gittayim and have been sojourners there to this day. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And as she fled in her haste, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. Now the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothites, Rechab and Baana, set out, and about the heat of the day they came to the house of Ish-bosheth, as he was taking his noonday rest. And they came into the midst of a house, as if to get weeds, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baana his brother escaped. When they came to the house, as he lay on his bed, in his bedroom, they struck him and put him to death, and beheaded him. They took his head and went by the way of the Arabah all night, and brought the head of Ish-bosheth to David at Hebron. And they said to the king, "Here is the head of Ish-bosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord the king this day on Saul and on his offspring."
Yikes.
Uh-oh.
That was not a good idea.
What do y'all think?
David's gonna put him to death.
Uh-oh.
Yep.
We saw how this happened last time. 3 chapters ago.
We brought you back his head. You're welcome. No.
No. You shall be put to death.
Ouch.
Yeah.
They must have moved, the news must have not circulated around. They had learned from their friends.
Reverse psychology didn't work that time.
Nope. Any other,
Thoughts before we go through verse by verse?
I guess we can just start going verse by verse.
Yeah, let's do it.
When Ish-bosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed, and all Israel was dismayed. So,
I start telling us Ish-bosheth.
what's the problem with this?
So basically now that Abner's gone.
Not having a response.
Yeah.
Not having a rally point.
I mean, it's pretty understandable why he feels that way, but we have to also remember who is Ish-bosheth. Like, he's Saul's son, but position-wise, who is he?
The king.
He's the king.
Okay.
So again, he kind of leads the people, and so we see that it's not just his courage failing, but it's really as a result all of Israel, and so that's a problem. But we also saw in previous chapters that Ish-bosheth was kind of a weak king. It was mainly Abner who was in power, and so this also again kind of foreshadows what's to come. But if Abner was really the guy who was in power in Israel and he's dead, what does that kind of mean?
It's only a matter of time before Ishbosheth.
Yeah, exactly. So there is kind of that foreshadowing there. Again, we see that the house of David strengthens, but the house of Saul weakens. And so even though it didn't really happen the way that David planned, or not that he planned, but the way he anticipated, again, the promise of God is still kind of coming. Yeah. Now, Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baana, and the name of the other, Rechab, sons of Rimmon, a man of Benjamin from Beeroth. For Beeroth is also counted part of Benjamin. The Beerothites fled to Gittayim and have been sojourners there to this day. Not really too much there to dwell on, but just setting up stuff, yeah. So we have two guys, two brothers who are Benjaminites. That's kind of the main thing there. And then just a little bit of context there, telling you what's going on. And again, also telling you this book was probably written later on when you see phrases like "to this day." So, you know, the Israelites who had been being told this story would have heard all these different names, and they're just explaining, you know, this is who they are.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much all that's there. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And as she fled in her haste, he fell and became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth. We won't hear about him for a while, but why is this important?
Seems that the line of Saul is still alive.
Yeah, like there's still a son of him alive, and so that's gonna like kind of not foreshadow, but we'll see later on, because we know that, you know, while Saul still has sons that are alive,
They
that
are
means that they're
illegitimate in God's eyes.
And so I don't know if him becoming lame really affects that, but it's at least kind of throwing that in there to, because it does seem like kind of out of context if you just look at it like that, but it is important to put that in there because, again, what we're about to see happen is that the other of Saul's sons dies, and so kind of saying like there is those other guys still alive.
And we also know that David and Jonathan were really close, and I don't remember at what point it was, but there was a point whenever Jonathan and David had a conversation, and I think it was, I don't remember if it was before he left, like they had their last encounter with one another. He talked about like David like showing kindness to Jonathan's like line and his people, and Jonathan said that he would. So later on in 2 Samuel, we're going to see that David spares Mephibosheth on the account of Jonathan and his relationship he had with Jonathan. So I think this also is kind of here because it shows Mephibosheth's name before that ever happens, so we know in the back of our mind, there's another person out there that is in Saul's line, but is also specifically from Jonathan, right? So we know that's in the back of our mind. His name's mentioned before the actual account of that situation happens, if that makes sense. So that's something to you can think about.
Yeah, that's true. Now the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out, and about the heat of the day they came to the house of Ish-bosheth as he was taking his noonday rest. So paint the picture. We got two guys, and it's in the middle of the day, but Ish-bosheth is sleeping.
So these are the two captains that come up to the house?
Yeah.
I can just see it.
Just trying to get you to like paint the picture, because you know it's not just what they do, but it's also kind of the manner that they do it. It's also kind of just like a kind of a. It's like, you know, killing someone while you're sleeping. It's like even more just.
Kind of a cowardly way to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't think of the word.
Kind of reminds me how they off people in the Breaking Bad. It's just very casual.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Just like, you're bad.
It is.
Yeah.
He's just laying there and moved.
And they came to the midst of the house as if to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. So again, it's like very not insidious, but just like secretive. Like they're acting like they're not trying to kill him, but then they just kind of kill him secretly while he's vulnerable. Yeah. And we also, again, we see it's very contrasted to the way that David does things. David doesn't really have to act too much in secret because he's pretty much usually in the right. But these guys are having to resort to, these like secretive means to accomplish means by their own hands. And so, what's that?
That should tell you something.
Yeah.
You're in secret.
Yeah, I think that's important because again, we see it's like the difference between David allowing God to put him on the throne versus people trying to get him on the throne, or if David had tried to get himself on the throne. This is the kind of stuff David would be doing if he was trying to do it by his own hands. Yeah. When they came into the house, as he lay on his bed, in his bedroom, they struck him and put him to death and beheaded him. They took his head, it went by the way of the Arabah all nights. So again, it's kind of the repetition. It's reiterating like this is not good. Like it's in the house as he lay on his bed in his bedroom. They struck him and put him to death and beheaded him. Like it's very, very repetitive. You don't really need to say on his bed in his bedroom. Like we know where the bed is, and they struck him and put him to death and beheaded him. They're all kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like it gets more like intense. Like you struck him, and then it's not just like because like if someone like strikes someone, it's like okay they could have got injured. No, you put him to death. Oh, no, you didn't just put it. You beheaded him. It's like whoa. Like it's getting more intense as they continue to describe it. Just kind of shows corruption a little bit. It's like that wasn't necessary.
Wanted to know how they went by the way of the night and kind of took a longer route back home. Like they didn't want anyone to know.
Yeah, it's like zooming in. So it's like they're sneaking into the house. They came into the house on his bed in his bedroom. So they're there, and then they strike him, but maybe he's not quite dead yet. So then they have this struggle, and then they take his cut his head off, and then again, like you said, they kind of go the long way in secret. Definitely not the way that God runs things.
Yeah.
Anything else to add there?
Do we talk about maybe like the motivation as to why what do these two people have against like Ish-bosheth? Like what are they thinking? Like why are they like
They wanted to be
let's go with Ish-bosheth. It's like
on David's good side, maybe.
They want to be on David's good side.
Yeah. Well, I guess if we go back to the beginning, what's the state of the nation of Israel right now? I'm sure there's not only one person who's probably thinking, oh, this guy over here is getting stronger and this guy is getting weaker. It's only a matter of time, like you said before David takes over. And so, if you have these people who are kind of opportunists, I mean, it's kind of like how Abner was. I mean, he saw that Ish-bosheth was weak and he figured maybe that he'd just go ahead and get on David's side while he could before he gets killed, and maybe he would be better off. I feel like it's kind of probably the same deal here.
Yeah.
These guys see that Ish-bosheth is weak and he's gonna die, and he sees that everything's gonna fall apart, and they're probably thinking, well, we should probably just get on David's good side, and maybe we'll be better off that way, because if we stay on this side, we're probably just gonna die in battle. Which is ironic considering what happens, but does it all make sense?
Yeah.
I think it's also kind of important just to talk, because we don't get too much information about Ish-bosheth and from his perspective too much, but I think it might be important to note, we see verse 4, not verse 4, verse 2, now Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of the raiding bands, which is the 2 people that just killed him. So Ish-bosheth had 2 men who were captains of raiding bands, so like his own little army type situation. Ish-bosheth had them. So what does that say about, what are their names again? Rechab and Banah. They're
traitors.
Yeah, they're underneath Ish-bosheth. So Ish-bosheth, he's the king of Israel, and he's kind of the leader of these people. 2 people who you're a leader of come and kill you while you're sleeping. What does that say about like Ish-bosheth's leadership as a king? Or even if you took away king, even as a commander of a raiding band, what does that say about him? If your own people come and kill you while you're sleeping.
mean that you're not very good.
Yeah, exactly. You're not too good, right? So I mean, that's just showing Ish-bosheth in the side of leadership, because we don't get too much insight of him that much. Just being able to read kind of through those verses and pick that out. He's not the best leader. He's not super strong, which we kind of knew, but this kind of solidifies it a little bit, because his own people come and kill him while he's sleeping. So one, the people don't like you, but even if your men were going to kill you, you didn't raise very courageous men, because your men were scared and they come and kill you while you're sleeping, and they flee in the nighttime away where nobody can see. So it's like, not only were you a bad leader to where your own people are willing to come and kill you because they have no loyalty to you, but you didn't even raise courageous men that could come and do something. I mean, it would still make it wrong, right? You shouldn't go and just randomly kill your leader. That's wrong. I'm not saying that it's right. But I'm saying even the way that the people are going about doing something that is wrong still doesn't have any underlying courage. Does that make sense? Not that killing them is a good thing, not a good thing, but you can see that Ish-bosheth's leadership is not very good through this situation. So that could be something we could take away too, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. And brought the head of Ish-bosheth to David at Hebron, and they said to the king, "Here is the head of Ish-bosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord the king this day on Saul and on his offspring." What do y'all think about their, not response, but what do you think about what they're saying to David here
It's almost like the same thing that that guy came.
in chapter 1?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say Saul, your enemy, who sought your life, and who do they credit? Who do they credit their evil deed to? I should say.
To the Lord.
Yeah, it's like it's one thing to say that we helped you out. It's another thing to tell the man after God's own heart that basically God condoned killing the king in his sleep. This is like the epitome of taking God's name in vain. Doing something that God would never ever condone and saying, "Yeah, the Lord has avenged you." And how do y'all think David's going to respond to this?
Yeah.
I'm not happy.
They're gonna feel like that.
Yeah, not happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely not happy.
But it's an important thing to consider, though. But the whole thing about like taking God's name in vain, I think it's something that we don't always talk about, because we oftentimes reduce that command to just like not saying GD or something, which is important, not to throw his name around like that. But I think this is perhaps an even more serious thing, is to slap God's name on your own plans or your evil things, or just things that in general he would never ever side with or condone, and saying like in the name of God, essentially, I do this. You see this throughout history, people doing terrible things in the name of God, and we want to make sure we're not doing that. We don't want to do our own things and slap God's name and say, this is God's will, whenever you don't know that, or it's just simply not.
Yeah.
Anything else to add to that?
I think it's good to know that there's multiple things in here that would probably pique David's ears that would make him angry. So first, here's the head of Ish-bosheth. Okay, we know he's dead. You're just holding Ish-bosheth's head, right? The next thing, the son of Saul. Whoop, you're already on David's bad side. You touch someone who was related to the anointed person. Oh, you're already bad. Your enemy. David never thought of Saul as his enemy. Whoop, another tick mark, 2 strikes. Who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord the king this day on Saul and all his offspring. You're crediting it to God. Oh, 3 strikes, you're out. Like there's multiple things that I think that David would get mad at here. You're killing someone whenever it's not needed. You took things into your own hands without coming in, like asking David, seeing what's going on. It's someone who is with God's anointed, so in the line of Saul, and you're doing it on behalf of God without seeking God, asking his opinion, doing something evil in the name of God. I think there's a lot going on here, and they definitely did not think about how they worded that before they came to David, because that is just littered with lots of things that David does not like. So I think there's multiple things there that are kind of red flags for David that I think would pique his ears. We good to go? Next
Yeah,
one?
I think so.
Look at that, so short, guys. Okay. 4 more verses.
But David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Ramon the Beerothite. As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity. When one told me, behold, Saul is dead, and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house, on his bed, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth? And David commanded his young men, and they killed them, and cut off their hands and feet, and hung them beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ish-bosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron.
They brought the.
My question, Sean, is the tomb, is that more of a burial, isn't it? Or no?
You mean?
Buried it in the tomb, so is that more respectful than the actions before?
I think it's trying to probably make a contrast, and it's also trying to show like the respect that David has for Saul and the people of his line. And we see like in Genesis, whenever people die, their bones are collected, they're put in a vase, and you put them in the tomb with their family. It's like a respect thing to have all the people gathered together. So I think it's kind of supposed to be something like that. It's showing David's like perspective and his idea of respect with Saul and his people.
I guess technically it's not with his family, because he's buried with Abner,
Yeah,
not with Saul, Jabesh Gilead.
yeah.
But again, like with the story of Jabesh Gilead, you know, David again took seriously giving respect to God's anointed, and like you said, he's doing the same thing here. Any other thoughts before we go through verse by verse?
He already brings up what happened earlier in I think it was the first or second chapter, right? Second chapter?
First chapter.
First chapter. But he brings it back up. If I handled this way, why do you think this is a good idea? Did the exact same thing. You made it worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure why they would have thought anything different would happen.
Maybe they didn't hear what happened.
What's that?
Maybe they didn't hear what happened.
Give the benefit of the doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
That would explain why he repeated the story of when he killed the other guy.
That's true.
I mean, the guy it happened to wasn't alive to tell the tale, so it is possible that they didn't hear about it.
True. I just like it because it's like all that stuff, and it's like, but David answered them. But David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, the sons of Ramon the Beerothite, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity. When one told me, behold, Saul is dead. Oh, we'll stop there. It's verse 9. So, how does David start to respond?
He's giving credit to God.
Yeah, it's like these guys. It's like, I guess the way I'm kind of seeing it is like, God's always been the one to like basically save him, but these guys are coming to him basically doing that instead of God, and so he's kind of saying like, you know, they're putting themselves on this side. He's like, well, no, God's over here, not with y'all. That's kind of how I'm seeing that. Anything else there? Okay. As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity, when one told me, behold, Saul is dead, and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news.
Kind of the uh-oh moment.
Yeah. Can I imagine like the guys sitting there listening to him, thinking, uh-oh, should have brought their brown pants today.
And read everything else.
Yeah.
I don't know. They might need to wear their yellow pants too.
Yeah. It is kind of, what's the word? Not facetious, but kind of humorous the way that he refers to it as his reward.
Yeah.
To me, that seems like he's kind of also revealing kind of their motives behind why they did what they did. It was less about, following God and more about advancing themselves. And so
So they're acting to get something to favor from David, or
Yeah,
something,
well-
or at least to be liked.
I guess to me it's kind of like when Jesus talks about like the Pharisees doing all these things openly like for themselves, and he says, I tell you they have received their reward. To me, I feel like reward there is used somewhat facetiously, and I feel like it's kind of a similar thing here. Because obviously it's not really a reward.
To be killed,
Yeah, but I guess in the sense, it's just they didn't really get what they expected. But
And I think it probably really shows also like where David's head is at with this situation, because whenever you give somebody a reward, that's like a really high prestigious thing, right? If you go to a competition and you get first place as your reward, you're like, yes, I won the competition. Like that's like the thing you're shooting for, right? Is to get that reward. And it's almost like you're seeing how seriously David takes God's word, right? Because he's saying that, like, the punishment that he gave these people was a reward. Like, that was the best of the situation. Like, really, they deserved, like, almost worse than what they got, but what they got was a reward. Like, the punishment from killing people in light of injustice, David takes really seriously, and especially doing something in God's name, and doing something that affects God's anointed and stuff, that surrounds that. I think that he's saying, like, their punishment was really a reward. Like, they deserved much worse than what they got. But I consider that a reward. Like, death is just a reward for them. Because he takes God's word so seriously. I think it could maybe be that too.
yeah, that makes sense. At the very least, it's what's fitting.
Yeah.
Because if you win the race, it's fitting to get a first place reward. So at the very least, it's fitting. If not more than what you said.
Yeah.
But how much more when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed? Shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth?
It's making it sound like they did something much worse.
Yeah.
Like you killed him when he was helpless.
Yeah. It's somewhat similar to what happened with Joab and Abner, except even worse than that as well. Because the idea of like you said, killing someone when they're helpless, at nights while they're sleeping, like that's just like the worst of the worst when someone's defenseless.
Because then I think David views that as like, whenever these people are killing, they might in their head, I think, try and convince themselves that maybe like it's justice. But even then, in this situation, I don't even know if they would be thinking it's justice as much as they were just trying to prove themselves to David to be on his good side. So I don't even know if even the two men that killed Ish-bosheth would be thinking this is justice because of this specific situation. But David has like a real issue with things not being done like right in God's eyes and having like true justice in his kingship. We see over and over again that's something he's concerned with. And so in his eyes, doing this, you're just like killing to kill. You're just murdering to murder someone. And David is just not going to be okay with that. He's like, because there literally is no justice at all behind that. That's not eye for eye, tooth for tooth. You're just killing to kill at that point. You're killing for vengeance. And David's, he's not about that. So.
Yeah, and how does he refer to Ish-bosheth as?
Righteous.
Yeah.
And he calls the men wicked.
Yeah. And when did we see David use that term before? What other people did he use? Yeah, he used that for Saul and for Jonathan too, right? Yeah, which him and Jonathan were close. And I think he had described him in ways like that before, so that wasn't too much of a surprise. But especially with Saul, saying that a righteous man has died, and telling his men to mourn, shows the way that he sees other people. So he sees Ish-bosheth, which is part of Saul's line, as a righteous man.
Not as his enemy.
Oh.
Okay. That's fine. The computer screen agrees with us.
Because also, like, in response to what they said, Saul, your enemy, but yet at the same time, he's calling them the enemy, and he's actually calling what they call the enemy righteous.
Yeah. Turning it upside.
It's completely just flip flopped. Like, definitely not what they expected.
Yeah. Which is what we see David do over and over again. He just turns everything on its head. Completely different from what everyone else sees, and that's whenever we see later on when we get to the Gospels. We talked about that a little bit last week, but later on when we get to the Gospels, you can see how character traits of David, how Jesus is portrayed in character traits of David. Jesus comes through David's line, right, through the line of Judah. But you can see that a lot of the ways that David runs his kingdom and the standards and the morals that he relies upon, which is God's morals, right? Because he's a man after God's own heart. We see that the way he runs things is very different. He flips things upside down, and then before you know it, whenever Jesus comes and he gives Sermon on the Mount, everyone's like, what in the world? You're flipping everything upside down. The Pharisees are like, what is going on? And so they want to run things the same way. You see some parallels between them two, how you can see Christ in David. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And David commanded his young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and feet and hanged them beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ish-bosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron.
I want to highlight by the pool at Hebron. They did that so everybody could see. This is what happens if you mess with David.
Or
This is not.
This is what happens when you try to take care of things your own way.
let's say.
And it's not Joab doing it either. Joab's usually the one that does his work. Like in this last little bit, it's actually David doing it.
Yeah. And again, it's kind of like you said. I think you mentioned it a second ago about the contrast with like the way that he deals with them. So like, whereas these guys killed Ish-bosheth injustly, or is that the word? Wickedly, unjustly. Yeah, doesn't sound right. Unjustly, and thought they were doing him a favor. Not only does he consider them wicked and Ish-bosheth righteous, but also he doesn't really give them like a proper burial in that sense. He like hangs, kind of like what the Philistines did with Saul and his sons, where they kind of hung at least parts of their body up for display. He kind of does that with them, whereas Ish-bosheth, at least the head, what he has with him, he actually gives it a proper burial.
Yeah.
Because that's what you do with the righteous. The wicked, they're more made to be an example. Which is a pretty gruesome sight.
Yeah.
Probably not as bad as, the whole headless body thing, but still.
Not the first time David was dealt with just a head. 'Cause
Yeah.
he also did that with Goliath. Oh, he didn't bury Goliath in a tomb, but
That's
he
true.
just had Goliath's head. So
That's true.
I guess David has a trend of just having heads of people.
Yeah. I don't know why I thought of this. It's probably not really that relevant to the text, but I thought of like the whole concept of like thieves. When like you cut their hands off as a punishment.
Yeah.
It's almost like the idea of them being thieves, like they're kind of taking things into their own hands or like stealing life, and as a result they like have it cut off and it's like out for display.
Oh yeah. Oh, I've never made that.
It's like this is what happens like whenever you like try to steal, trying to think how to word it. Because you're not. It's almost like stealing from God in a way. But I don't know if that's really the intention. That's just.
Yeah.
I could kind of see it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. It might have been a fit punishment just to cut off their hands and have them live in shame.
Yeah, that would have been a reward.
They cut off their heads because they thought that they did the right thing.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, your head doesn't work.
It's like it's like stealing things with your hands and then walking the path of the wicked with your feet.
There you go.
I wouldn't tie that to the text necessarily, but it's just kind of like a thought, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we made it to the end. Anything else about the text itself before we move into like possible applications? Okay. Not saying that there is application, but is there anything that we could pull from this that could maybe be applicational?
Big takeaways.
Yeah, that you could think of.
Don't take things into your own hands, or matters into your own hands.
Good. Yeah.
Let
Yeah.
God take care of it.
Anything else? I think that's a good one. I think we could even add on to that, like, don't take things into your own hands, let God handle it, but like also like seek God in your decisions that you make, right? Don't just like rashly do things out of vengeance or anger or any emotion, right? Don't just rashly do things. Ask God. Hey, we see David do that a lot, right? David shovels, he asks all the time, right? He says, hey God, am I supposed to go here? Am I supposed to do this? Am I supposed to fight these people? I mean, we're obviously, none of us are going into battle outside in the driveway or something like that. But you can apply it in a different way. Just going about our daily lives. God, do you want me to do this? Do you want me to pursue this relationship? Do I need to go and talk to this person? How do I handle this situation? How can I glorify you more in my daily job, right? Just different things whenever you're going throughout your daily life and you're making decisions. We make decisions every single day. Asking God and seeking Him. Don't just make the decision, right? You are made in the image of God. Christ dwells inside of you. Ask Him what you think, what He thinks that you should do, right? I think that's a good thing that we could apply.
Yeah, because that's part of it too. Like, sometimes the only real difference between something being sin and not being sin sometimes is just the heart behind it, or whether or not that's what God wants you to do.
Yeah.
There's things that David does that look bad, but they're actually God's will. There's things that he could do that would probably look good to people, but wouldn't actually be what God wants him to do. Again, with the whole, there's plenty of times where he could have, like when he could have killed Saul or Abner, and I don't think a lot of people would have really viewed him badly. But again, he wasn't really concerned with his image to man. He was concerned with, what God thought. And so, again, with like seeking, God's will in everything you do, it's not just about how things look. It's about how God views them, and what your heart is behind it. You want to guard your heart.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, to go back to our question today. I love how in our chapters and application always somehow it goes back to the question of the day. Remember when we used to do Proverbs and it used to almost always tie into the proverb? Yeah. Now it almost ties every single time into the question of the day, and it amazes me because we almost reference it almost every time. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Anything else y'all can think of?
Very gruesome chapter.
Yeah. Very gruesome chapter.
Violence.
Other than don't kill people, I don't have anything else.
I guess I could reiterate what I said earlier, because I just thought it was a good little side point to make about the just not attaching God's name to things that He would never condone.
Yes.
To me, that's taking the Lord's name in vain, and that's the one that's a lot easier to commit than just not saying a word. It's pretty easy to not say a word or to not do this or that, but whenever it's a more insidious thing, like what you're attributing to God, because it's like that's kind of what Saul would do. He would kind of slap God's name on stuff that he did that was not godly to appear godly. Like whenever Samuel approached him about the sacrifice, and he basically put the blame on Samuel and said that he was trying to get God's favor, and God would have never condoned breaking the law, and we don't want to do things like that. God wants me to do this thing that contradicts His nature, and so we just have to be careful about that.
Yeah, there's also something to be said about living the law of the land, or following the law of the land, as long as it doesn't contradict with God's law.
I thought that's what you were saying too.
Yeah,
I thought you were saying that.
You mean like the U.S. law or something?
Yeah, like U.S. law.
Submitting to the law, yeah. Or submitting to the authorities above you, whether they're Christian, non-Christian. Yeah, because that's the thing. It's not really about what you want to do or what you not want to do. It's about the fact that God put those authorities above you. So you submit to them because you're submitting to God by doing that. Yeah, that's true. Anything else? Someone want to pray us out?
Before we get into prayer, okay, remember I mentioned Ish-bosheth earlier, and I said that there was an encounter between David and Saul. I'm going to read it to y'all because I didn't want to lead y'all astray in any way, but I found the chapter. It was chapter 20, and this is when, like we said, Jonathan was wanting to protect David, and so he would kind of go and talk to his dad and kind of figure out what's going on, and then he'd come back and he'd tell David, hey, this is where Saul's headspace is at, right? So they're having a conversation, and David says, let me find, if I continue to live, Jonathan says, right? If I continue to live, show me kindness from the Lord, but if I die, don't ever withdraw your kindness from my household. Not even the Lord cuts off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. Right? So that's what Jonathan says. So it says, Jonathan is saying, even if I die, the people that come after me that are from me, spare some of them, right? So that's why we know Mephibosheth later, I think it's chapter 21, 2 Samuel, or somewhere in the 20s somewhere. David is going to spare him because he thinks back to that conversation, and they made an oath with God in between. So they made a covenant with one another, right? And that's the line it was talking about. So show me kindness from the Lord, but if I die, don't ever withdraw your kindness from my household. So from Jonathan's household. Mephibosheth is Jonathan's son, so he's going to think back to that situation when it comes later on. Yeah, I just wanted to tell you all that because I mentioned it and I said I didn't know where it was, so I found it so that way y'all know where it is. But that was
I think it's chapter 9, so it's actually the Mephibosheth thing.
Is it really?
I think it's actually chapter 9.
Oh, okay, chapter 9, guys.
So even sooner.
There we go. We get to see it sooner, not far from now. Next week is David anointed king of Israel, guys. We're getting the fulfillment of God's promise. Look at that. That is exciting. Stay tuned. Come back next week to see David anointed king of Israel. We've been waiting for this for months, guys.
Yeah.
Ever since 1 Samuel 16.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, now does someone want to pray us out? Lord, we thank you so much for this time that you have given us, for us to gather here in a house with lights and air conditioning and our own copies of our Bible, either physical or being able to just pull it up with a swipe of a finger on our phones, which is just such a blessing that you've given us. And being able to gather without fear of persecution, that we can freely gather and talk about your name and glorify you. Lord, we thank you so much for that. I pray that as we leave this study, that we can take this information that we learned and we can apply it in ways that you want us to apply it. And then maybe we can use this information as a way to lead someone to you throughout the week. We can use this knowledge that you've given us to point others to you, to glorify you. And we can use it as a way not to boast and to put knowledge underneath our belt so we can go around and talk about how much we know. But we can really use it as a way to show others who you are, and also to let Scripture really just live inside of our hearts so that we can learn to have a closer relationship with you, that we can learn to love you all the more by reading this passage and by chewing on the information that's in there. Lord, I pray that as we go throughout our week, we can be a light to others. We're called to be light of the earth, light of the world and salt of the earth. And I pray that we can do that as we go out and we're around other Christians and people who aren't Christian. We can be a light in this world so that we can give glory to you in heaven. We thank you for our healthy bodies, the breath of life that you give us, for our eyes to see, our ears to hear, our sense of feeling, and how we can use all of that to see your glory each and every day. I pray that we can become more grateful for you as we go about our days. We thank you for all that you are and all that you do for us, Lord. We pray this in your beautiful name. Amen.
Amen.